There are differences of emphasis between President Obama and Governor Romney in this campaign. There are probably more similarities between them than in the domestic arena, where the differences are more stark and I'm Nigel Sheinwald. I'm a recently retired British diplomat. My most recent posting was as British ambassador to the United States. In terms of the differences between the candidates on the election trail and whether that would translate into different policies in the presidency, I think the reality is that whoever wins this election is going to find himself constrained by a series of factors. First of all, the state of the world economy and the state of the American economy limits choices for any incumbent today, and that affects not just American leaders, but European leaders, Chinese leaders, whoever it is working in a world where you have fewer options than maybe at a time of political and economic plenty. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as far as Governor Romney is concerned, if he were to win the election, of course he's going to get a much broader range of advice from his military commanders, from his intelligence chiefs, from his foreign policy and aid professionals than he's been able to get on the campaign trail. And foreign policy hasn't been the biggest issue in this campaign. It's maybe taken a bigger role over the last few weeks, but obviously he would have to get a qualitatively different set of advice if he became president, and that might cause his views to adapt somewhat. But all that said, yes, there are some differences. There are differences of emphasis and tone. Obviously, Governor Romney is saying that he would establish a different tone, be more assertive about America's role in the world and American leadership. He's unhappy with the way that certain things have been done under this administration. But I think there would also be a very broad measure of continuity. I don't think there's any question of the deadline for troops moving out of Afghanistan changing. He's unhappy with the way it's been handled, but he's not saying we're going to change the end 2014 deadline. In terms of Syria, he has some ideas on helping the rebels in more practical ways than the current administration is doing, but he's not saying let's go for a ground intervention, or he's not crossing any Rubicon to that extent. And I think the areas where he has struck out on, for example, on Russia or on China, we just have to see how much of that would translate into new policy. In terms of foreign policy, America learnt some lessons about the limits of military power during the course of the last decade with these painful wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but it has not yet ceded the concept of world leadership to any other power. I don't think it will do, and maybe won't need to, because it still has significant strengths. It has strengths in economics, strengths in demography, in higher education, and certainly in terms of its military superiority, which will continue for some time, compared with the relative difficulty that China has in its own neighborhood, and the difficulty that China has in attracting allies and really strong long-term partnerships. So of course the world has changed. It's become much more contested and multipolar, much more unstructured in terms of the overall framework of international relations. But I think that for the foreseeable future, for the next few decades, and certainly for the next presidency, America is going to remain the world's most influential power politically, militarily, and economically, and the rest of us have to gauge our own foreign relationships with that in mind. Well, the issue of Iran is going to crop up very early in the new administration. All the intelligence estimates that I've seen reported on in the media certainly suggest that we're coming into the period where Iran will have enough fissile material to start thinking about making a nuclear weapon. So I'm not saying it's going to be immediately in the next presidency, but we're entering the next year or two are going to be absolutely critical years in this, after a period in which that moment was significantly delayed by problems in the Iranian program and our own and Western activities. But yes, this is going to be a major issue for the new administration. There's obviously a possibility of Israeli military action, and maybe even a possibility of American military action, which is occasionally talked about. I think there's a first step, which is that whoever wins the election, I hope will consider that if there is a possibility of military action, you also have to think about making a new and bigger offer to Iran to see whether there's a way of changing the calculus over the negotiations. At the moment, they're bogged down, but I think there is a case for trying to see whether a broader US-Iran dialogue going in parallel with the discussion on nuclear weapons might not break down some of the barriers which exist in the negotiations at the moment. So I'm in favor of a more imaginative offer to Iran, respecting our bottom lines and everything else, particularly if there are some in America who are contemplating the possibility of military action. If there is military action, I don't know what the reaction in Europe will be. I think it will depend on whether every effort has been made to avoid it. The mood in Iran, they also have elections next year, so you'd have to gauge the political temperature and atmospherics in Iran. But I think it's most unlikely that the UK government would, as it were, join in with any Israeli or any potential American activity, although of course if Iran were to retaliate and that were to involve British targets, then obviously that would be a different matter. And if there were retaliation against American targets, then I think our alliance with the United States, it wouldn't bring us in any in a sense of British boots on the ground in Iran, but obviously we would have to think about what support we gave to the American effort. Obviously the in-tray of the new president is going to be pretty full, but he's going to want to think about what the priorities are for him over the 4 years of the next term. And I would say that boiling it down to two simple things, it would really be two. They're not simple themselves, but just to simplify the task. The first is undoubtedly the relationship with China. And Mitt Romney has had a different position on that on the campaign trail from President Obama. But the American policy is going to have to contain two elements, one of which is a power balancing, a power containing element in relation to China, and the other is the cooperative relationship, which is the object of American policy, and which the Obama administration would say complements that edge of helping to use America's alliances in the region just to maintain a presence and to stem any unwelcome Chinese moves in the area. These two have been carefully balanced in the Obama Asia doctrine, which we've seen unfold in the last couple of years. So I say number one is the China policy, and whether under Romney it becomes a little bit more aggressive and assertive. And the second undoubtedly is Iran, as we were discussing a minute ago. It's going to be right high up in the president's in-tray. It's going to involve that key relationship with Israel. It's going to have an impact on the Arab Spring and on America's wider standing in the world if there were any military action. So I think this is going to be a very big issue for the next president, whoever it is.